Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast featuring the hostess with the mostest and the best Lauren. I am the best Lauren, and with me, as always, is the hostess with the mostest, Karen Peterson. How are you, Karen?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm having a little fun with Zoom today.
Yes, we've been playing around with Zoom because we actually have a Zoom account now that we're not just like mooching off of other institutions. Yeah, I'm good. I'm tired. I just got back to New York 2 days ago, Friday afternoon. So I'm a little bit like frazzled and freaked out, and I really haven't been out much other than to go to the grocery, but I'm just like, oh my God, people. Oh my God. Like
there's
things.
People, there's sounds, there's traffic.
Things and stuff, and like I parked a car. I parallel parked in New York City, everyone. This is the most exciting moment for me, and I didn't hit anybody, so knock on wood.
Yet, yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
Good job.
New York is an exciting place. I also crossed like 3 lanes of traffic getting off the GW bridge. So if you've ever gotten off the GW bridge in New York City, you know that this is actually a feat that is deserving of praise and love and honor.
Yeah, I don't know about any of that, but I have been in the traffic on the 405, so I feel like I kind of understand what you're talking about. Probably.
I think that maybe the traffic probably moves more slowly here, but it's pretty much the same principle.
It depends on the day.
So how are you, Karen?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired, but things are good. My baby sister, we had her bridal shower yesterday, and she's getting married in July. She's been taller than me since she was 12, and she's 27 now. So she's not a baby, but she's my baby sister. I was basically at the end of my junior year of high school when she was born. So it's just like, yeah, it's just a little weird for me, but it's fun. She's just, I'm so excited for her wedding. It's going to be beautiful. So, but yeah, both of my younger siblings are getting married this year. So it's been a lot of wedding. I'm a little weddinged out. And by November, I'm going to be like, let's never go to another wedding.
Yeah, that's a lot. Well, with some of the restrictions lifting and the pandemic, at least in various places, people feeling a little bit more confident about doing things. Mm-hmm. I imagine, if everybody's going to get married and go to the dentist.
Well, it's funny because my sister and her fiance got engaged 2 years ago. And when they set their date for July 21, everyone was just like, why are you waiting 2 years? And she's like, we just, we're not in a rush. We just want to take our time and do what we really want to do. And then, yesterday she and I were talking, she's like, I'm so glad we waited, because if we would have done it last year, we would have been one of the ones that either had to resort to Zoom or had to move everything and try to find a date. And there's people now that are booking weddings for like 24 because they can't get in any sooner.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No, I had a friend that got married last year, actually. And they decided to go ahead with it. And I think that they just had like their immediate families.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an outdoor wedding and everything, but it was kind of like, either we go ahead with this or who knows when we're actually going to be able to get married. And so they decided to just go ahead with it. But yeah, it's wild, but that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
So it's fun. And so like yesterday I got to see some cousins that I haven't seen in years. The cousin that I grew up with, that I was the closest to, I probably haven't seen her since we were like in our 20s. So it's been a really long time. And yeah, it's just fun. That's one of the fun things about this, is like getting to reconnect. And yeah.
That's great. Well, so for this episode, we decided that we wanted to talk about book adaptations, mostly because poor Karen took one for the team and watched The Woman in the Window, Better You Than Me. I even though I'm sad that it isn't a good film, because the trailer looked interesting. It's a good cast. And I haven't read the book. It's a popular book. I know some people who have, and then there's all of the drama with the author, which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the book itself, but is still kind of wild. I remember reading about all them, being like, what
that New Yorker profile is amazing. It reads like someone's writing a profile about like Tom Ripley or something. It's
wild.
And Dan Mallory is not as interesting as Tom Ripley. Let's be clear about that. But the profile that was written in the New Yorker was very well written and made his life seem much more fascinating than it really is.
Yeah.
He's basically just a lying liar who lies and somehow managed to manipulate his way into a best-selling novel. And yeah, that was actually one of the things I was trying to get across in my review of the movie, was like, the book itself isn't good. It just was popular, and good is not a prerequisite for popular, as we've seen many times even just the past year. Like, this is just something that happens. But yeah, so I was like,
yeah. Well, and I think that this is a good place to start in talking about book to film adaptations and stuff like that, is that there are some bad books that get made into good films. And so the book being bad doesn't necessarily mean that the film is going to wind up bad. And some of that is because, if you've got a good director, a good screenwriter, good actors, etc., you can actually take kind of the seed of the story and adapt it and turn it into something that's much better. There's also, I would say, there's also a lot of mediocre books that get made into very good films. So one of my favorite sort of mediocre books, I guess, that has been made into a fairly decent film, or a very decent film, is The 39 Steps, which was directed by Alfred Hitchcock eventually. But the initial, if you ever actually sit down and read the initial John Buchan thriller, it's fine. It's not particularly a great book. It's not particularly like interesting. But it's fine. It's pretty much a bog standard thriller, and Hitchcock adds all of these things to it. He adds the romance, he adds he changes some of the relationships, things like that. Also, Psycho is a terrible book. If you've ever read the original book by Robert Bloch, it's a very much a like bog standard pot boilery horror novel, right? It's not particularly well done. It's not particularly well written. Of course, it's been made into one of the most iconic films of all time. So you can get bad books that then turn out to be fairly decent films. That did not seem to happen with The Woman in the Window.
No. And that's the thing. Like, the bones are there. And this is why you can have some like mediocre books become good movies, because if the bones are there for a good story and then you have the right person adapting it, both the writer and the director, then it can really work. And I honestly feel like that could have happened with The Woman in the Window. I don't know where the breakdown really happened. I mean, there's so many stories about things that went on with this production. It was really meddled with the studio. It had some disastrous test screenings where people were saying the ending didn't make sense. It's like, well, then they were probably trying to be too faithful to the book. And it's frustrating because it was written by the adaptation. The screenplay was written by Tracy Letts, who is a good writer. He's done a lot of plays, like he's done some screenplays, and he's a good writer. So I don't know what the problem is. And like, this is directed by Joe Wright, who's had 2 Best Picture nominations in the last 10 years, with maybe it was longer than 10 years, Atonement and Darkest Hour. Atonement is a great adaptation of an Ian McEwan novel. I think it's Ian McEwan, but anyway, but yeah, so it's like, I don't know where the breakdown happened, but the problem isn't everyone's like, oh, well, you know, it's just trying to be Rear Window. And yeah, and it doesn't pretend that it's not trying to be that. The thing is that you can have a good adaptation of Rear Window. You can have a good reimagining of that story. And this could have done that with just better, you know, I don't even want to say better, because Joe Wright and Tracy Letts are good creators. The actors are amazing. Like it's got an incredible cast. So that's where I'm like, I don't know where the problem is. And I suspect that part of it is that because the book was so popular, there was once again that superficial, like, oh, people liked this book, they think this book is good, they want this exact story on the big screen, rather than looking at it for what it is and going, how can we improve on this? And yeah, so it just became a disaster.
Well, yeah, that issue of faithfulness can result in some really bizarre things. Like one of the films, I mean, I don't like the book particularly, and I really don't like the film, but the Da Vinci Code.
Oh yeah.
Which, you know, is based on such a popular novel. And again, great cast, great director. There is no reason. And really the novel itself is very cinematic in the sense that you've got these really short, you know, bite-sized chapters that it's very speedy. It's so fast that sometimes you are able to ignore the many, many problems that the book has. But it's like the film sort of took that and managed to just magnify all of the problems.
Yeah.
Because suddenly, I guess that part of it, when you've got that, there are like whole speeches that characters give in the book, and sometimes you're willing to go along with them and sometimes you're not, but the plot itself is so entertaining that you keep on going, right? I think that, like, by putting that up on the screen, and having characters actually say some of these things, which are batshit. I mean, 3/4 of the Da Vinci Code is just weird pop conspiracy theory stuff that just doesn't actually make any historical or religious or philosophical sense.
Right.
Or artistic sense, right? And then you put that up on the screen and you put those words into the mouth of like Tom Hanks and Ian McKellen, and you're like, oh, this is crap.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that this was such crap until this moment. But now it really is like, first of all, no one talks like that. That's not the way the human beings talk to each other. But you get that in those kinds of adaptations where you can take something that is incredibly popular and works partially, I think, because of the medium. I think that the Da Vinci Code works the way that it does and was such a popular book because people were reading it so quickly that they were just kind of skating over the issues with it. They weren't thinking about it too much. The film somehow made you think about it more. And as a result, you wound up realizing how silly everything was.
Yeah.
So
but still, the thing is though, that the movie was still entertaining enough because, you know, you've got like Tom Hanks and Ian McKellen, and they're just fun people to watch on screen. So it's like, even though the story is crap, it's just a dumb story, it's still entertaining. The Woman in the Window was not entertaining. It's just, at least, I mean, I know a couple people said, oh, I thought it was fun. It's like, all right, fine. Like, obviously everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but part of the problem with it was just, it's so illogical. It doesn't, like, it leans too much into the fact that Amy Adams's character is just drunk all the time, and it basically just plays out like you're the drunk person that just has no idea what's happening, and that's just okay, fine. It's just, it doesn't work. There's too many gaps, there's too many holes, too many things that are just never really explained at all. And then on top of that, it's just incredibly mean to every woman in it. And that was my issue with the book too, especially with the main character, Anna, because she's just this like sloppy drunk, just literally sloshing wine around, not caring, just kind of like whatever about everything. And it doesn't make any sense. It completely, like, she's supposed to be this renowned child psychologist who was making tons of money before she had to put a pause on her career. And you don't get that way if you're not good, you know, like, so she's obviously successful and very educated. And there's no sign of that in her character in the book or in the film. And that was the thing that just made me so angry about it.
Well, that's a fault of the characterization, obviously. Yep. And poor Amy Adams has not been doing great.
No.
In terms of her film choices, but it's that, I mean, that's sad. And you do kind of think that they would have been able to solve some of those issues, right? And so maybe it is exactly as you say, that it's too much adherence to the original source material. And so again, it's the same problem that I had with the Da Vinci Code, that magnifying issues that maybe you were more willing to walk past in the source material, maybe not, but it just sort of makes it so clear and blatant. It's just like, oh, these are really unlikable characters, or this main character is not believable, you know?
Right.
So I think that leads us into like a good question, because one of the things that I did back when I was an English student back in college was to actually work with adaptation theory. And I'm not going to go into like all of the permutations of adaptation theory, but the whole idea about adaptation theory is the adapting of specifically books, novels to the screen. And obviously, you cannot take a novel and just put it up on the screen. Most of the time, it's going to be incredibly long and incredibly boring. So, of course, when you deal with films that are adaptations, you have to kind of look at what they do. Do they accomplish the same thing that the book does? Do they not? You know, how are they kind of successful in the transferring of one medium to another? Because really, novels and films, even though we treat them as though they're very closely related, films are much more like plays. Because plays are not intended to be read, they're intended to be watched. Same thing with films. You don't read about a film, you watch a film, right? Even when you read about a film, you then often go and watch the film because you want to see what it's doing. Whereas novels obviously are intended to be read. So it's weird that we have this like correlation between the novel and the film as being so closely related when they're not. But so one of the arguments of adaptation theory is that it's about whether or not the film has to simply be slavishly devoted to the book, or in order to be successful, in order to be a successful adaptation, or can it value more the spirit of the novel? So can you get more of a sense of what the novel is trying to do in the adaptation? Obviously, this varies from film to film, because we do have these films that are very good adaptations of very bad books. So it's like, well, the book was terrible, the book has all of these problems, the film actually takes the concepts that the book has and sort of runs with it and does something else with it. But so I wanted to kind of start that off as saying, like, what do you think about that? And maybe talk about some of what we think are some of the most successful book to film adaptations and why they're so successful.
Yeah. You know, I used to always be someone that I would read a book, I would love the book, and then I'd go watch the movie and I'd get mad because they left out this scene, or I can't believe they cut that character out completely, you know, and it would just make me crazy, and I would just be so frustrated. And then I was reading a screenwriting book actually several years ago, and I don't even remember which one it was now, but it was kind of breaking down the differences between novels and plays and films, and in a way that, like, it makes sense, but it was a way that I had never really thought about it before. And it was just basically saying that, like, novels are mostly about being inside a person's head. So whoever the narrator is, whether it's an omniscient, you know, third person narrator, or an actual, like, you know, specific character or whatever, you're inside somebody's head and you're experiencing the story through their eyes. And then a play is really focused on the dialogue. It's about people talking to each other and not talking, because sometimes the silence can be even more important. And then film is about the visual. It's really about, you know, you can obviously, because we've had many conversations about silent films, you can have an entire movie where nobody says anything to anybody at all, but you have these amazing visual experiences. And so when it comes to adapting a novel for a film, it's really more about finding ways to get across the emotions and the visual, you know, representation of that story. And so, you know, now I look at adaptations much differently. In fact, when they're too closely related to the book, it's funny, I've gone totally the opposite direction. Now I'm like, well, what was the point then of making it into a movie if you're going to make it just exactly the same? People should read the frickin' book then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was thinking about, as you were talking about, I was thinking about the recent release of the trailer for Gawain and the Green Knight, which is based on this. It's a medieval poem. It's written in Middle English, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this, and I had to read Gawain and the Green Knight when I was in college as part of my English degree, but I was amazed at how many people obviously had never even heard of the story and were then looking at just like, oh my God, this guy with like, he gets his head removed and then this happens. Like, do you not know how like fucking insane people were in that period? Their stories are off the wall. Like, are you serious? You have not even heard of this?
When people tell me now that like, oh, the world is the worst it's ever been, I'm like, have you ever studied Roman history? Like, oh my gosh, no, we can be so much worse than we are. Not that we're great, but we have some room to be worse.
I mean, the literature from the medieval period is bonkers. Like, it really is. Oh, yeah. And I mean, I remember reading actually when we did Old English, one of the few surviving Old English poems is a poem called The Rood, which is quite literally a story told from the perspective of the cross that Christ was crucified on. And it starts out like the entire poem is from the first person point of view of a tree that then eventually gets turned into the cross, right? And like all of the different things that it goes through. It's crazy. It's one of those things that like is so far removed from our experience of contemporary poetry, contemporary literature, or, you know, what you write stories from. This is the kind of thing that you're like, a 10-year-old kid would come up with this. Like, I'm going to tell this story from the perspective of a tree.
Yep.
But it's this really, really, you know, important story. So you get something like Gawain and the Green Knight or the Canterbury Tales. If you ever sit down and read the Canterbury Tales, which are, again, gross and hilarious and bizarre. And, you know, some of it is just like adolescent humor that you're going like, this is what, like, we have this idea that our ancestors were these incredibly, you know, erudite and intelligent people. It's just like, no, they were making like fart jokes half the time.
Well, I mean, obviously. To be fair, they died when they were 40. So if they're making at their height of their career when they're 20, that still tracks with our...
Exactly. You got to laugh at it, but it's all of this, you know, same thing with something like the Decameron. But so I think that it's interesting, you know, to take that kind of literature. So how do you adapt that to the screen, right? And there have been actually films that have been made of the Canterbury Tales, and I'm trying to remember who. Pasolini did a version that was the adaptation of like 3 of the Canterbury Tales. There's an adaptation of the Decameron. And again, these are things that don't necessarily lend themselves to cinema, and we don't think of them as having a relationship to cinema. So if you read the original poetry and then you actually watch the film, you've got the basic plot, and that's pretty much it, right? Because you don't have people speaking in Middle English, you don't have that a lot of the wordplay and things like that, but the visual elements can kind of lend themselves to what the poetry is doing linguistically.
Yeah. Well, even sorry.
Go on.
Well, I was just gonna say even something more contemporary like The Lord of the Rings, where there are just pages and pages of people singing songs. There's that entire section before they ever get to not Riverdale, Rivendell. Riverdale was a I'm never gonna not mix those up. But anyway, there's a whole section where they meet Tom Bombadil and Goldilocks, is that her name? And
Goldberry, I think.
I don't remember.
Something like that. It's Tom Bombadil and his wife. It's
yeah.
I have no idea what Tolkien was doing.
No, and nobody does. I think he was smoking a little bit too much leaf himself right there. But that's the thing. It's like that's not something that translated to the screen. Not that it couldn't. You could do some really interesting things visually with the story of Tom Bombadil, but translating the Lord of the Rings books, which are really about this group of people that have committed to go and destroy something for the purpose of saving the world and saving humanity in all its forms, having this side story where they journey with this guy, and it's just, this kind of psychedelic experience. It doesn't fit into the movies. That does not take anything away from the people who love that character in the book, but it didn't fit into the movie that Peter Jackson was making. Yeah. And that's okay. And that's the thing is like, there's a lot of great books where, like you're saying, or plays, or, these epic poems, the Odyssey, and the Iliad, there are adaptations of those. And there's a lot of stuff in those stories that just don't work when you're trying to adapt it to film.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think that the concern always has to be about the medium, and like you say, so Tom Bombadil, it's still a question about whether or not the Tom Bombadil section works in the context of the book.
I know people who love it, so it's like, I don't want to take anything away from them, but and
it's it can be a lot of fun, but it's not essential. Right. It's not, and it's the sort of thing that as an editor I would have been like, is this story necessary? We can cut this out, and you don't really change the rest of the narrative. But yeah, but it cinematically, like you said, it would never work. It would not work because it would stop the film dead. And people just be like, what the hell is going on? It would stretch out an already long film and long series of films even further. Yeah. And I do think that there are places, even in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where Jackson is too dedicated to the books. He's way too intense about, we have to adapt everything. We have to include all of the characters. And there are definitely places where it's like, I think that you need to move on. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I was always very angry because with the final film, because he cuts out the scouring of the Shire at the end. I know. Which I think, and now again, that in contrast to something like the Tom Bombadil narrative, the scouring of the Shire is very important to the whole kind of meaning of the story. Because it's essentially saying that every place has been affected. It's not just Gondor, it's not just Rohan, it is also the Shire, this place that was supposed to be safe and protected and completely removed from the violence of the outside world, has also had this rot seep into it and has to be cleaned up at the end. And
the only ones that are able to do that are the ones that were looked at as like the troublemaker kids, those pesky kids who went off and had life-altering experiences that gave them the perspective and the courage to do what needed to be done when they got home.
Yeah, exactly. You get Merry and Pippin coming back, and they've changed. They have changed in a massive way, and they're able to kind of bring all of that back and say like, okay, we're going to protect our home, and we're part of this world. Yeah. In a way that, and I think that the film kind of shirks that. Yep. A lot.
I agree. And with 5 endings, they still couldn't get that right.
And yeah, exactly. And I understand, like, I don't really want the Return of the King to be longer than it already is. But it does kind of feel like that there was a missed opportunity there, and that it does kind of ignore some of the concerns of the book, because it allows for this space where there is a place that hasn't been affected, really. Yeah. That hasn't really experienced what the rest of the world is experiencing. And that's unfortunate. But so that's where you begin to question, what does the film have to do in order to be successful? You know, can you make a film about an incredibly misogynist text, right, that then kind of flips it on its head and treats it as a critique of the misogyny that is inherent within the text? And so you can get something like American Psycho, which is an incredibly misogynist text written by a misogynist, even though he kind of tries to be like, no, I'm making a commentary. It's like, no, read the book. It's not, if he's trying to make a commentary, he's indulging himself way too much.
He hates women and it's obvious.
Yeah. And then you've got the film that is basically a critique of all of that.
Yep.
But by still using the structure of the novel, the characterizations, etc., but the way that the film is made itself and the fact that you've got a female director changes the meaning of the book. So on the one hand, you're like, well, is American Psycho a successful adaptation? Not really, because it doesn't maintain the spirit of the book at all, but it does something very different with a very problematic text. I don't know. I find that interesting.
I agree too, but I mean, I agree with you that it's a great adaptation. I don't know that I would say it's the criteria for whether it's successful is its faithfulness.
So what would you think is the criteria for success at that level?
I don't know. I guess I haven't really thought about it in those terms, but I don't know. To me, a successful adaptation is one where fans of the book also enjoy the movie, regardless of how similar or different it is.
I think that's a good comment. Yeah, I would probably agree with that. Although, do fans of the book enjoy American Psycho? I mean, if you love American that's the question with American Psycho.
True.
Or with
I don't actually know anybody who's read the book.
I read the book.
Besides
I read the book back in grad school. It was not a pleasant experience.
Doesn't seem like it would be.
It was very distressing. But you know, and that is one of those books that, because it's told from this very, very close first person perspective, there's an open question about how you read it. So you can read it as completely straight in terms of it's this self-indulgent misogynist fantasy, or you can read it as it's critical of self-indulgent misogynist fantasy. And so you can read it both ways depending upon how you want to take it, essentially. So I guess at that point you could argue that the film chooses one of those readings and goes with it. It's not completely out. It's not changing particularly the content of the book, but it is a very particular interpretation of the content.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that it's an interesting issue. So yeah, I think that it's an interesting issue, and whether or not, like you say, whether or not something is successful or something isn't successful, is kind of how you're defining success. So what are some of your favorite like book to film adaptations where you think that the film really succeeded with its source material and did something really great with it, or where it actually kind of exceeded?
I have a few where the movie is actually better than the book, but just as far, like, just going along the lines of like things that were similar but did a good job with the movie adaptation, I would say one for me is Bridget Jones's Diary.
Oh, that's
which,
a good one,
yeah, the book, it really is written in kind of diary format, and sometimes it's kind of like bullet journal format, where it's like just it's a collection of notes, and you're getting the sense of Bridget's life, not through a spelled out written narrative, but through just kind of like getting glimpses of her experiences throughout the course of this year. And I think that the adaptation of that into the screen and really turning that into something where, as you're reading the book, you're like, oh yeah, like you can see the movie playing out the scenes that you're reading in the book. So I think it's a really well done really well done adaptation. Man, I love that movie so much, and I like the book a lot. Although it's funny because I feel like Daniel Cleaver is even more of a cad in the book, and it's like he sucks in the movie, but he's even worse in the book.
Well, I think that having Hugh Grant play that character sort of helps him. You get why she is so charmed.
Yes, yeah, and that was necessary.
And you're just like,
yeah,
you're just like, yeah, he's really fucking charming. He's also a creep, but he's really charming. Like you get that sort of thing. It's funny, the first time I saw the film, I hadn't read the book when I first saw the film, and I remember like hating. I didn't know anything about the film. I hated Mark Darcy. Like I hated him, and I was just like, oh, what a jerk! Why would she ever be interested in that guy? Like, oh my god! Like I absolutely thought it was just like that she was going to wind up with Cleaver or something like that. And then by the end of the film, it's like, oh, he's amazing. Yeah.
He's the best. I love him so much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I will say there is no fighting in the street in the book. That was a great addition for the movie.
Which, is definitely a needed addition.
Especially to the tune of It's Raining Men. Oh, it's perfect. Yeah. What's one of yours?
Well, going off of that, one of the films that I wanted to refer to is Pride and Prejudice from 1940. And this is one of those where if you say, okay, is this a good adaptation of the book? No, because it goes hard on the comedy. It doesn't really deal with the kind of social issues or things like that. At that level, the miniseries is obviously the most kind of faithful to the concerns of the novel. But it is so much fun. It's so silly. It is like the weirdest kind of Hollywood vision of what Regency period England looks like. And it's not even close to any sort of reality. It's Hollywood land, right? And one of the things that I really love about it, and it's something that the book probably couldn't do and that no other adaptation has even attempted, is that it takes Lady Catherine de Bourgh and it makes her into this like really wily feminist. And you don't realize it until nearing the end, where there's this whole thing, like the final scene between her and Lizzie. She is basically she's testing Lizzie the entire time. And she goes out and Darcy is sitting in the carriage. And Lady Catherine says just like, oh, this girl is amazing. She is perfect for you. Just like, I insulted the hell out of her. Now you go in there, you get her. Like, it's this wonderful moment of just like, of completely upending expectations, including the expectations of the novel itself. Because obviously Lady Catherine de Bourgh is not like that. She's played by Edna Mae Oliver, who is a very recognizable character actress. She's like the haughtiest woman in the world, but she's hilarious. And kind of the interplay between her and Greer Garson and then her and Olivier is just wonderful. Again, completely outside of what the novel was trying to do. But I like the fact that it worked in from this character that is so hateful in the book. It actually like turned her into this really interesting version of Victorian womanhood. And I quite liked that. So I love the 1940 Pride and Prejudice, which I've just spoiled for everybody, but still it's loads of fun.
Nice. Another one of mine is A Wrinkle in Time. The Ava DuVernay version.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The book is good. I really like the book. I really loved what Ava DuVernay did with that story, bringing it into a more modern time. And so obviously there are some just technological differences between the story from when it was written, which I can't remember exactly when the book was first published, but a lot of years ago, 1963, it looks like. And so it's the story is a bit different 50 years later when she's making the movie. But it needs to be. But I really like how it's still, even with those changes, it really captures the essence of that story. And you've got Meg, who is this like fierce girl who just won't be stopped. You know, she knows what she needs to do in life. She even when she's not sure, she's very headstrong. And I think that giving that character, like casting her as someone who's biracial, I think does really help with modernizing that story, because the book written in the 60s, you know, having it be about this girl in the 60s, that was enough. But in, you know, the 2010s or whatever, you needed you needed something a little bit more as to why she's being kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like why she's kind of being singled out at school as this problem kid, and why she's still being looked down on, even though she's clearly really smart, and why she just has all these problems. And it's, you know, I like how it addresses issues of racism without being like super overt about it, and without that's not even the right word, but I don't know if I'm making any sense on this, but I think it was a good way to modernize the story is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that you are making sense, and that's a good example of taking the source material and changing it a little bit, right? So adding that extra element, changing some of the relationships a bit in order to update it. So like you say, you're talking about a book that was written in the 1960s, which doesn't contain, you know, some of the concerns that the film does, and is kind of moving and so the film sort of moves that forward a little bit. It's like, okay, this is a really good story about kind of being an outsider and being treated as like you say, this problem child. This makes it even more interesting if you are talking about a girl who is biracial, and so is having to grapple with that problem in, you know, whatever 2000, I forget what year that film came out, 2017, 2018, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And so that adds an extra layer to it, and it brings it out of the safe zone too, because like you say, a little white girl is, you know, okay, that's interesting. But if you're talking about a little Black girl who's dealing with all of this, you've added another layer to the story, and you've made it feel more urgent, I think.
Yeah.
So one of the other films that I wanted to mention as sort of a film that completely departs from, it's funny, it departs from the actual text of the story, but I think it's the best representation of the character. One of my favorite books is The Talented Mr. Ripley, and I love Patricia Highsmith, but I do not like the adaptation of The Talented Mr. Ripley with Matt Damon and Jude Law, even though it's very faithful in a lot of ways to the book, but it treats Ripley's homosexuality especially it actually treats it too overtly, and it makes that kind of his neurosis or whatever, it turns it into a neurotic element of his character, and the reasoning behind everything that he does. One of the wonderful things about Ripley in the book is that he does what he does because that's who he is. It doesn't have anything to do with repression. It doesn't have anything to do with you know, repressed sexuality or anything like that. It's not really a desire to you know, have sex with Dickie. It is a desire to be Dickie. That's really what this is about. And I think that the film misses the mark on that. The film that hits it really well is Purple Noon, which was made in, I think, the late 60s with Alain Delon, and in a lot of ways it departs from a lot of the elements of the book that I kind of wish it didn't. I think that it botches the ending a bit, but the characterization of Ripley himself, that kind of desire to inhabit another human being and to become someone that you want to be by essentially taking over someone else's life, is so well done, and Delon fits the character so well that I just absolutely adore that film. And that's one where it does depart a great deal from the book, but the characterization is perfect. So.
One that is miles better as a movie than it is as a book is Forrest Gump.
I had no idea that was actually a book.
It was a book written by Winston Groom. And it's funny because he also did write a sequel to the book. And the opening line is like, don't ever let anybody make a movie about your life because they're going to get it wrong. Something like that. Because it's the book is, I mean, the movie is so different from the book. The essential elements are there. You've got Forrest Gump, who has a mental disability that's never really defined what it is. And he goes through just kind of like falls into one amazing situation after another. That is true. And he has a very close relationship with his mom. And there's the girl Jenny who pops in and out of his life every now and then. But the actual experiences that he has are just as much as the movie is just like so far-fetched and like, wow, that wouldn't ever really happen. Like it makes sense and seems possible compared to the stuff that happens to him in the book, where he ends up in the space program. He ends up running like naked down the freeway with Raquel Welch. Yeah, like I'm trying to remember some other specific things that happen in the book, but it's one of those where, I mean, that they got the essence of the character, they got the essence of the story, and then turned it into something that has those fantastical elements, but makes sense and just like it's fun to watch. But the book is just, it's batshit. Yeah.
Well, based on that, we did have a question that I actually think that we've largely answered.
I have not answered it yet.
You haven't answered
Nope.
it yet. All right. So the question from @Noah_Saturn is, what is your favorite book to film adaptation where the film is better than the source material? I would say that Psycho is definitely mine, as I mentioned earlier. And again, I think that, you have to be aware that very few people are aware that Psycho was originally a novel. It's not a good novel. It's very overwritten and it's kind of bizarre. And actually, if I remember correctly, Norman is not like this kind of sympathetic young man. He's this sort of gross, middle-aged motel proprietor, and it makes everything a lot seedier and a lot darker, and also in some ways a lot more obvious. Like, one of the things that Tony Perkins brings to that part is that he is so sweet and likable in a lot of ways, and so kind of sad. And you understand why Marion has such sympathy for him at the beginning. And then, of course, as the film goes on and you see him protecting his mother, etc. And then you find out things about him that kind of complicate that. But he's so likable in a lot of ways that you kind of, it upends some of your expectations. The book doesn't really have that. He's not particularly likable. He's not a particularly charming character. You don't think that he is, sympathetic in any way. And so when some of the twists happen, it's a lot easier to take in some ways and a lot less shocking and well done. So that's definitely mine. So Karen, what is yours?
My very favorite book to film adaptation, where the film is miles better than the source material, is Jojo Rabbit, adapted from Caging Skies by Christine Lunens.
I should have known.
You should have known.
I should have known. I forgot.
And you would have known if you had read Caging Skies, because that book is terrible. And it ended up becoming one of my favorite movies of the last 10 or 15 years. It's the book is about this kid, Jojo Betzler, who becomes close with the Jewish girl that his mother is hiding in the walls of their house. That part is true. But the difference is, there are many, but the key differences between the book and the movie are that Jojo Betzler is, he's 17 when the book opens. And the reason that he's not able to be conscripted to go to war is because he, in that training accident that we see at the beginning of Jojo Rabbit, his hand is actually blown off because of the grenade. And so he's injured, he's disabled, he's not able to go fight in the war. And this is something that he takes very personally. And so when he discovers the girl living in their house, at first it's not cute because he's older, and so he's extremely mean to her, but then also becomes just kind of more and more obsessed with her. And what I love about the way that Taika adapted that is because of the fact that Jojo is so young and so impressionable, like him having this little crush on this girl, it makes sense, and it's really sweet. In the book, Jojo becomes obsessed with Elsa, and to the point where it just becomes very creepy and disturbing. And he basically turns her into a captive, and the war ends halfway through the book. So
I think I remember you talking about this when we talked about Jojo Rabbit. Yeah, that's that's not great.
No, it's not, because that means you still have half a book where Elsa does not know the war is over, and Jojo is keeping her captive, and it just gets really disturbing. And I mean, it's the way that Christine Linens wrote it. It's interesting to, on one level, to get into his mindset of, you know, his obsession, but it's not done in a way where you're sure if you're supposed to be for him or against him, and that's a little disturbing. In the way, kind of like the show You on Netflix, which is from the perspective of the stalker. And I saw so many people who were like, Joe is the best, I love him, and it's like, no, you're not supposed to, he's the bad guy here. And that's kind of how Caging Skies is. It's like, you're not supposed to like and root for Jojo, because he, like, by the end of the book, he's like 25, 26 years old, still keeping this girl captive, and knowing perfectly well what he's doing, but constantly rationalizing it. Mm-hmm. And so it's so much, you know, it just, I already loved Jojo Rabbit, but then reading the book and seeing where the, like, what inspired that story, and just going like, wow, this is miles different. Like, they are so far apart. And it just made me appreciate the film even more, to see like, wow, he managed to create this beautiful, beautiful story out of that.
Well, it's interesting to talk about, like, so changing the character's age makes such a big difference just to begin with. That, you know, going from a 17-year-old boy that you're like, you should know better, right? In a lot of ways. But a little child is just like, well, of course you just absorb what you're being taught, you know, and how you're living. And so of course this small child is going to be like, well, Jews have horns, right? It's like, no, just like, oh, okay. And then also that willingness to accept changes to his world also. Yeah. So yeah, I had completely forgotten that was originally a book, and now that you talked about it again, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really, really dark.
It's so dark. It's so dark and so disturbing. Watch the movie; it's so good.
Yeah. So any other thoughts about book to film adaptations? I think we've kind of covered everything that I was sort of interested in talking about. Was there anything else that you wanted to say, including about the terribleness of Woman in the Window?
I think I've pretty much summed it up, but I think it's important to, when you have a book that you love and there's an adaptation of it, I think it's important to just kind of remember that the movie is not going to be the same, because it's not supposed to. Mm-hmm. You know, there'd be no reason to adapt it if it was going to be exactly the same, and just try to enjoy the experience of your story for something different. And you know, because that can be really disruptive, I think, to the experience, if you're just constantly holding on to, well, they changed this and they did that. Like, just let go and just try to evaluate each one for what they are separately.
Yeah, I think that there are definitely times, particularly recently, where we where filmmakers are so worried about pleasing fans of the original material that they wind up making bad films. And you know, you talk about some of the adaptations of, really, when you look at superhero films, they're adaptations of characters. Sometimes they're direct adaptations of things that happen in graphic novels. And that is an adaptation, but they're so worried about the fans being angry or the fans being disappointed that you don't actually consider what is best for the film itself and what doesn't update to the medium, because it is, again, it's two different mediums. You're talking about a literary medium that is entirely linguistic, and you're talking about a visual and oral medium, right, that is that has a whole bunch of other elements to go into it. And to be way too devoted to the original text can really be detrimental to the film itself, because the film is a separate piece of art. Yes, exactly. Yes, well, so I think that is going to close us out for today. We were talking about some interesting stuff. And as always, we are very, very grateful to our wonderful patrons who continue to help us keep the lights on, keep us hosted. We do have some new stuff that will be coming up for our patrons. We're going to have a May bonus episode soon. And I think that by the time that this is going to be published, we will have decided which that will be. And we're also going to work on trying to be certain that patrons can actually vote on these things. If you're not on Twitter, we tend to run our polls on Twitter. So watch out for that. And then right now there are a whole bunch of other fun things that are up on our Patreon. So thank you so much to Adriana, Ali, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Mason, Matt, Matthew, Michelle, Monty, Nina, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Tao, and Will. And if you would like to join our Patreon, that's patreon.com/citizendame. We're really, really grateful for that. And also you get some fun, like, extra stuff and more extra stuff, which we keep on promising, but we are doing once we're like all calm again. I personally am not calm at the moment. But you will get there. I will get there. So, you know, keep an eye out for that. And we also have our Zazzle store at zazzle.com/citizendamepod, where you can buy some of our merch, including masks. Some of us are not required to wear masks anymore sometimes, but also probably you should continue to, because we want to all be careful. Yes. We also have our Ko-Fi. That's ko-fi.com/citizendame if you want to just toss us a couple of dollars, but you don't want to make the commitment to the Patreon yet. Our website is citizendamepod.com, where you can read Karen's review of The Woman in the Window, which definitely inspired me to never watch that film. And it's a very well-written review too, so definitely go and check that out. And there will be some more reviews coming up, and various other features. You can also email us at citizendamepod@gmail.com, and we try to answer emails. We definitely check them every once in a while. If we don't get back to you, you know, just give us a minute. Sometimes we get behind on things. We are also on Twitter and Instagram at citizendamepod, where you can contact us and let us know how much you love us. And we are also available individually. I am on Twitter and Instagram at LHBusiness. Karen, where are you? I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Karen M. Peterson. And that will close us out for today. We will talk to y'all later. Bye.
Now, mademoiselle, where is Jesus sitting?
In the middle.
Good. He and his disciples are breaking bread. And what drink?
Wine. They drank wine.
Splendid. And one final question. How many wine glasses are there on the table?
One. The Holy Grail.
Open your eyes. No single cup. No chalice. Well, that's a bit strange, isn't it? Considering both the Bible and standard Grail legends celebrate this moment as the definitive arrival of the Holy Grail. Now, Robert, you can be of help to us. If you'd be so kind as to show us the symbols for man and woman, please.
Oh, no balloon animals. Huh. They can make a great duck.